There is talk right now that potentially the United States and other countries are following, that they may make this they may create what's called a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Now, countries all have to have assets in reserve, Aaron, as you know. So Canada, where you're from, the U.S., where I'm from, most countries own a lot of gold. They have a lot of gold in reserve. Russia has a lot of gold. China has a lot of gold. America has tons of gold stashed in, I think, Fort Knox in D.C. I don't know what the situation is with Canada, but countries are required to keep certain assets on their balance sheet: cash, gold, silver. A lot of times they own stocks. Now there's talk that countries might use Bitcoin as a reserve. It might become an asset class. Now, this is something that isn't done yet, like the Wall Street ETFs are done. That's a done deal. That's legitimacy in the books. This piece right here, whether it becomes a reserve, whether the U.S. uses it, another potential rumor here, whether the U.S., Aaron, even uses it as a way to get out of the astronomical debt that the country is in, is also another talking point right now as this new administration gets in. Could Bitcoin actually get America out of debt? Could it get other countries out of debt? And could it be used as a strategic reserve in which companies could put it on their balance sheet and grow it? Now, that's interesting. And if that starts to get looked at like gold, it starts to become adopted by not only institutions on Wall Street, which is where all the money goes in the world, but also countries. That is
next level. When you talk about the countries, I don't know how much you were following it over the last couple of years, but the president of El Salvador,
there's one there, yeah, he's been
made Bitcoin legal tender in mid 2021, and they've been buying Bitcoin heavily since that point. And one of the reasons that they made that move, which was very controversial at the time, is he said, we want to get out from under the thumb of the American control and them constantly inflating, deflating, making everything in the US dollar. We need to be sovereign. We need to be independent. And the only way we can do that is by pivoting to something that can't be manipulated.
And the reason that didn't get a lot of attention is because it's El Salvador. It's basically a no-name, typically a corrupt country, very small, real GDP. So it wasn't like India did this or China did this. Or Australia did this. It wasn't like that. It was some little micro Central American country. But the fact is, they might have found a way to play the game. Now, so a lot of this puts the U.S. dollar at risk. So there's even talk that the U.S. dollar is at risk because what if more money starts going into crypto and Bitcoin reserve, just like it did at one point to gold and silver, right? There was a gold standard at one point, right? So we can look at the gold standard and say, does Bitcoin start to adopt some of the same characteristics of gold, in which there was a gold standard up until the 70s? Richard Nixon removed America from the gold standard. So if this goes, so there's one political thing that's already etched in stone done, the Trump factor. He has to stay alive. There's the SAB 121 bill that has to get unpassed. Wall Street's already buying. That's enormous for flows. That's probably what's kept it up and it's keeping it afloat. And then if it starts getting adopted as a reserve currency for countries, if America decides they want to put X amount of Bitcoin, and they already have a certain amount of Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Last I looked here, let me bring this up right now. So this is as of, give me 1 second here. So if you're watching at the a2show.com, can a Bitcoin reserve move forward with Congress expert? The U.S. government already holds more than 208,000 Bitcoin, but located than might be assumed. So this is the talk. Immediately it's rejected, Aaron, because it has to be, right? Immediately it's rejected because it has to be. But this is something that I think, this was last month. This was a little less than 30 days ago. Experts will always disagree with anything new at first, and they'll usually label it and put it down right away. So not unexpected that it got labeled as probably never going to happen. But the fact that they have 208,000 Bitcoin at, let's call it $100,000. Are you good at math? What's 208,000 times 100,000? I don't even think my calculator.
I'm not even going to try to do that. I'm going to do that on my calculator right now.
I'm doing it right now too. 208,000 times 100,000, which is what Bitcoin is now essentially.
Probably go higher than my calculator.
I think it's 2.08 trillion.
Yeah, it's going 2.08 E10 on my calculator.
Yeah, that's trillion, right? That they have now, and now there's talk, does America continue to buy it to basically pump up its assets and get out of some debt and gain on Bitcoin going a lot higher than 100,000? Some of the predictions right now are 150, 200, 250,000 short term. I think obviously some aggressive pullbacks that will shake people out and make them wish they never bought it.
They're very
20,
common.
30, 40% pullbacks, cut in half. It's a very volatile asset, but what you're also going to start seeing is these big swings, 5,000 point swing days, 2,000 point swing days, where before they've been a few hundred, right? So you have to have stomach for it, but the two political forces and the two economic forces are in place and are happening, and that's what completely removes the conversation from this being some sort of a mania. If you look at I think the most popular mania was the tulip mania of the early 1900s. Wall Street wasn't buying tulips. No, they weren't thinking about putting tulips on their balance sheet, and they weren't passing bills about tulips. So to put that to bed, you got to look at what you can look at a mania, but you've never seen Wall Street and governments thinking about getting on board manias for the most part.
Well, I think we have to look back to our previous episodes, and one of the things that we talk about all the time is follow the money.
Exactly.
There's no way that your BlackRocks your Fidelities and your Cities and these banks are creating these vehicles and investing their consumers' money into these vehicles without having a considerable amount of inside knowledge of what's going on in the government, what's about to happen in the government. They're not going to expose themselves. They're not going to invest that kind of capital, the kind of resources to make that happen. So when that happens, it's almost an automatic green light that this is the direction that this is going to go. And you can feel quite a certain level of certainty in that decision. And I think
you're exactly right. They don't have to buy it, Aaron. They can make as much money as they could ever need being in traditional ETFs, stock funds, gold, silver funds, real estate investment trust. Like they don't need to add an asset class to any of what they do, to any of their offerings, unless they feel that asset class has a chance to be a home run in the years ahead. They don't have to do it.